Why can't the narcissist just accept your love? Why can't you just accept our love is a question that I'm often asked. Why does there have to be the destruction? Why does there have to be the hate? And which is it that you prefer? I'm asked, do I prefer love or hate? And of course it is a pertinent question which is relevant to the issue of fuel. When this point is raised, it tends to be as an adjunct to other considerations such as, why can't you just always want the positive fuel from somebody? Let them give you the love, the admiration. Why do you have to provoke them to get upset or angry or hurt? Why is it that somebody hating you feels more powerful than somebody loving you? Are you addicted to causing pain so that you can get negative fuel from somebody? People may understand the necessity of the need for fuel. They understand that we have this need for admiration, for love, for adoration. But they struggle to understand why we cannot just keep it that way. Why is it that we also want the anger, the tears, the hurt, the hatred? And this invariably leads to the question as to why not always allow you to love us? Or is it that we don't prefer to be loved and we prefer to be hated? The answer depends on the nature of the appliance that we are engaging with. As I have explained previously, the appliances which supply us with fuel are broken down into three groups: primary, second and tertiary. Our attitude is the type of fuel that is preferred, and thus which governs the way that we want you to engage with us, is relevant with regard to the type of source. Tertiary sources. This includes groups such as strangers and remote strangers, acquaintances. We are pretty even-handed when it comes to our preference for the type of fuel that we receive from those in the tertiary group. Positive fuel is welcomed. So, for example, we might be complimented on our car by a passing stranger, or we may receive an admiring smile because we look good as we get into the lift with other people. Indeed, if we are at an event and we receive acknowledgement and applause from a crowd of people, then this is repeated positive provision of fuel from their admiration. This also serves our purpose in receiving fuel and maintaining our facade. We are, however, content to draw negative fuel from strangers, for instance by upbraiding a waiter for being slow to serve us, or criticising the behaviour of somebody in the street. Their reaction of indignance, annoyance or upset will provide us with negative fuel, and in many instances, treating somebody in this manner will not damage our facade, as we will be selective as to when we engage in this behaviour. Keep in mind that often we will seek a negative reaction, even though that person has not done anything wrong, because this amplifies their emotional response. If the waiter has actually been slow, he will apologise as he recognises his service has been substandard. This will provide fuel. If he has been prompt, but is denigrated for his service, and our denigration is done in a haughty and arrogant manner, he will not be able to keep his expression from belying his real feelings, assuming he doesn't actually get to air them, and thus the fuel garment is even greater. It's even better if he erupts, and is unable to keep his feelings under control, as a nice dollop of fuel will burst from him. The treatment of a tertiary source in this manner is often done as part of a triangulation. It will be done to impress another source that is with us, possibly a group of inner circle friends or the intimate partner. Thus, we exhibit our confidence and lack of acceptance for shoddy surface. The tertiary source provides fuel from being criticised, and the other source provides a positive response for seeing us act in such a masterful and demanding way. Even if the other source does not approve of how we've spoken to someone who reacts to us, it doesn't matter because, yes, you've guessed it, more fuel. Since the tertiary source is not somebody that we rely on for repeated provision of fuel, it does not matter to us if they withdraw and will not have anything to do with us ever again. It's not hard to engage with tertiary sources as they are everywhere. We do not need to seduce them extensively or cultivate any kind of relationship with them in order to draw fuel. Tertiary sources either provide it just by seeing us, or at the slight prompt from a comment or remark, whether it is positive or negative. Accordingly, because it is so easy to obtain this small amount of fuel, we do not care whether it is love or hatred. Hence, there is no real preference. Secondary, we prefer positive fuel from our secondary sources. Therefore, if we are to be loved by them, be that in a intimate way or perhaps familial or even just friendly from a long-standing friend of ours, somebody from our school days perhaps, then positive fuel is what is required. The secondary sources include colleagues, friends, and family members. This is not to say that negative fuel is not collected from secondary sources. It is, and I shall mention this in due course, but it is usually positive fuel that we take from our secondary sources. We do this because the secondary sources are where our coterie comes from, where our lieutenants lurk. It's also an important part of the facade. By treating them well, we secure their obedience, though sometimes we may need to lash out to ensure compliance, and therefore we are more likely to achieve what we want. As I have explained in the past, we draw three main things from our victims, and I mean victim in the sense of everybody that we interact with. Fuel, traits and characteristics for our construct to claim as our own. 3, residual benefits, money, accommodation, resources, assistance. Whilst, of course, these can be obtained from tertiary sources, that group is mainly reserved for the provision of fuel of a low potency. The secondary sources provide all three of the prime aims, and therefore by keeping them around and ensuring that they like, love, and adore us, we are more likely to achieve the receipt of these 3 items. The secondary sources, of course, is where the facade comes from. Accordingly, we do not want a range of people hating us and agreeing with you as the primary source. We want a solid and loyal wall of people who are in complete agreement that we are, of course, decent and wonderful. We also do not rely on the fuel provision from secondary sources anywhere near as much as we do from the primary source. This is for 2 reasons. 1, there are more people who can be secondary sources. In theory, the number is limitless. And 2, we see the secondary sources less often, speak to them less often, message them less often than the primary source. Thus, we have variety and less reliance, which means that it is almost impossible that we will find the fuel of one secondary source to be stale, which would result in disengagement. Indeed, the disengagement of a secondary source is more likely to happen because they have worked us out and do not wish to engage with us anymore, thus they stop providing fuel altogether, or they have moved away and our interaction is so intermittent as to be useless to us, or if they defy our instructions and become a traitor. They will be issued with corrective devaluations, but if they do not come back into line, it is usually far more effective to cut them adrift and recruit somebody else. This will happen to a family member who turns against us, or a friend is disloyal. They will be isolated, shunned, and used to triangulate with. Do what I want, or you will end up with Peter. Remember him? Nobody sees him around these days after what he did. We are rarely short of being able to attract new appliances to be our secondary sources, even though with lower echelon narcissists there is a churn and burn of friends, family members, a perpetual merry-go-round. Accordingly, for these reasons we are far more likely to draw positive fuel from the secondary sources, and therefore we do indeed prefer for them to adore us, admire us, and love us. We may draw sexual partners from these secondary sources. They may not be crowned as a primary source, but rather, by engaging in sexual interaction, this is done to keep them close to us, to converse them to do our bidding, and, of course, to provide us with fuel during the sexual act. Thus, secondary sources can find themselves in almost perpetual golden periods, so long as they do not transgress, as they keep providing us with positive fuel, and in those circumstances, we generally accept their love, their admiration, and adoration. Primary sources. This is the group that most people find themselves in when they have an encounter with our kind of a romantic nature. In terms of the reaction we want from our primary source, who is almost always an intimate partner, we of course want a positive one. We envisage this lasts forever because the primary source, as the name suggests, is the appliance which gives us the most fuel, most often to the highest potency. With such a high standard to maintain in terms of amount, frequency, and potency, the primary source is also the appliance which runs the greatest risk of malfunctioning and that fuel dropping off. It may be less fuel, but may not be provided as often as it should, and or its potency may well have been reduced, either because it has become too familiar and or the provider is not making the effort to maintain its potency. You may think that when this happens, why not just disengage and put in place a new primary source who will start with a new positive fuel afresh? Thus, we are loved, but then we stop, and that person is pushed to one side, and we get somebody new and receive their love. It's a valid point. But we don't do this because, 1, it may well take time, and therefore we would be without a primary source for a certain length of time. Fuel levels would drop, and this would be detrimental. 2, there needs to be a near seamless shift between primary sources. This would not happen in the scenario envisaged. 3, you have to be punished for failing us, hence devaluation. 4, negative fuel is very powerful. Of course, we cannot draw that straight away from a primary source, otherwise, if we commenced the relationship by hurting somebody, they would just leave us, and thus the fuel source would be lost. We need to bind you to us first through the seduction and golden period, so that when the devaluation begins, you will not depart, but rather stay and provide us with the negative fuel. 5, the negative fuel provides us with the power to also seduce a replacement primary source, which we will attach and then disengage you. 6, the negative fuel is so powerful because it is harder to make someone cry, become angry, frustrated, and so forth, compared to the presentation of positive emotions. Being able to do this to someone underlies the nature of our power over the primary source. And number 7, the negative fuel is powerful because of the contrast it affords when compared to the positive fuel that you once provided as a primary source. As a contrast to the positive fuel received from the secondary sources, who, for reasons as I've already explained, have to largely remain providing us with positive fuel. And in order to provide a contrast to the facade that we maintain. Since the primary source is the person who provides us with most of our fuel, it is they who are subjected to this need for both positive and negative fuel. We also keep moving between the two, the contrast causing the fuel to retain potency. And this is part of the reason why we switch so often, so repeatedly, and seemingly without warning. Therefore, as the intimate partner, it cannot be the case that we must always accept your love and nothing else, because of the risk of it becoming stale, but because of the need to create contrast. And that is why we want you to love us, we want you to hate us, and we alternate between the two.